I was asked to make a video about some of the complexities that I see in different OCD themes. And what I thought I'd do is take this excellent book, the Mindfulness Workbook for OCD. Um, and this is the second edition, but the first edition was a book that was very, very helpful for me understanding OCD many years ago when I started to realize that's what I had with the intrusive thoughts and mental compulsions and not so many overt physical compulsions. And so I think John Hirschfield has a really good list of the common subtypes. Now, I think there are other subtypes because OCD can latch onto anything and it sort of moves with culture. For example, cancelling being such a common theme in our sort of online media these days, you find that people worry about getting cancelled for things they put online. And you could say that's a sort of moral scrupulosity type theme, but it's become such a theme on its own that people often refer to it as sort of cancel OCD or cancelled OCD or something like that. So this isn't all the themes. This is an attempt to kind of pull out the main ones in groups. Um, and I just think it's a good list that I often use. And yeah, I wanted to recognize this book because it was very, very useful for me. Lots of mindfulness ideas that overlap with ACT, the sort of stuff that I really advocate for. Um, Absolute clarity and precision in the writing, and it's fun as well. And so, yeah, let's take it theme by theme. So, the first one I wanted to talk about is contamination OCD. And I'll try and move quickly and not give too many ideas in one go, and maybe we'll revisit some of this and go deeper if needed. So contamination OCD, I think it's so important to pick out, what is the person's individual presentation of this? Is it core fears about harming others? Is it core fears about harming ourselves? Is it about illness and death, or is it about illness and being miserable, or disease and being unwell? Is it being judged and shamed by others for making others ill? Is it something more in the sort of emotional, mental contamination world, where it's like the other intrusive thoughts from, say, some of the sexual intrusive thought themes are sort of manifesting as a felt sense of contamination, really digging into each person's flow of OCD, what the triggers are, what the intrusive thought is, what the specific compulsions are, and the physical are obvious, but what's going on in the mental compulsions. And then disgust is really the complexity I wanted to focus on more, is that contamination OCD can be so much linked to disgust, and disgust is a difficult emotion that everyone struggles with. People will say surgeons and doctors working with feces and other bodily uh, secretions don't habituate to that disgust. They feel disgust later on in their career if they're exposed to these sorts of things. They have good tolerance of the disgust. And so I think people often acknowledge that the habituation process may be a bit more complex. I feel the same about anxiety. I don't think anxiety is a simple habituation process, at least not in my world or the world of my clients. But disgust is almost resilient to that kind of mechanism even more. So, and also just the treatment may not be focusing on disgust enough. It might, everyone comes to OCD treatment thinking of it as often anxiety based. You might be having a lot of anxiety about the triggers and the contamination and the risk, and we're missing the disgust. So I think it's disgust can often trip us up. We need to counter this by, as I said, really formulating and understanding the OCD function, the core fears, the barriers that people are having to facing it, the level of insight. Sometimes people really know it makes no sense, but they just can't resist the emotional component. Other people really think these behaviors are protecting others, and perhaps aren't aware of the science around contamination spread, or they might have low insight on the emotional contamination. It just feels so horrible to have this association with this intrusive thought and idea that it really feels like everything is contaminated, and they will talk as if it really is, even though people move into houses where atrocities have happened and paint the walls and live a new house, a new life in that house, and go on with it. So, um, respecting anyone's beliefs around sort of spirituality and energy and things like that. But even if you've got that complexity with the moral or emotional contamination, um, still the essence of those approaches is that my attitude, my beliefs, my spiritual faith is stronger than those emotional contaminants or kind of energetic contaminants. So we want to tune into that part of the spirituality if that's what's making it hard to get through that side. So really understanding the presentation, identifying if disgust is a big part of it. I find it very helpful when things are more severe to work very, very gradually, to do a lot of motivational work. So, really thinking about workability. What is OCD costing me? What will happen if I continue to follow this? What will my life look like? Eventually, life will make me have to face these contaminants. So, for example, I've had lots of clients that will have to go to the hospital for a family member or their own treatment, and suddenly they're having to face a much more severe triggering environment. And so life will make us face stuff, if we literally get so locked in like people can with contamination that they're sort of stuck in their house. Things will still come into life to make you face it, or you live like that in complete avoidance mode for a long time and depression kicks in, or if you somehow manage to not get deeply into depression, then we'll have to face this eventually. There'll be a time in our life we have to face it, and then we face it with a lot of regret and think, actually, I was able to face this, and I could tolerate this distress and accept this pain. And gosh, I could have had all those years if I'd learnt this sooner. And I've seen this when people have these big sort of near death type experiences, or a reset of some kind where suddenly they are very motivated to drop all the OCD behavior. I think the other one is noticing how sometimes we won't do these behaviors around others because of social shame. So again, notice the inconsistencies in the pattern. I do it here, but not here. Well, if it was a real serious risk, I'd do it everywhere. It wouldn't matter if someone was here. And I know some of you listening will be doing it around people, and it's gotten so deep, but it's looking for the inconsistencies. So thinking about the cost and the workability over time, looking at the inconsistencies of the pattern, thinking about what you want your life to be about, really increasing that motivation to challenge it, understanding the specific triggers and fears so that we can think about how we use our skills and work on that. There can be a big component of responsibility OCD here as well, which is like, I've got to sacrifice my life because I'm not worthy and deserving and other people are. And I've got to protect these other people. And that's where I think you have to look at following these behaviors is harming these other people. It is withdrawing you, it's moving you into isolation. You're not available. The only thing we can do to protect our friends is to get out there in the world and be connected to them and support them emotionally, physically, be available if they get ill, be in touch. That's the best we can do. We can then be available to protect and support and help people. But if we're locked away following OCD because it tells us it's protecting people, actually we're not around, and things can happen in people's lives where they need us. Um, so trying to counter the responsibility with that, countering the responsibility also with compassion and the understanding that I do deserve a life, and actually me not living a life is robbing other people of their life and their connection to me as well. and trying to get a compassionate view that, no one else is having to follow these behaviors except people with OCD. And so why am I undeserving of a life? Actually, we have to have a balance of care and empathy for others and compassion for ourselves. But really, if we were putting our life on hold to protect others, there are better ways to help other people. We could go out there and be courageous in the world and support and look after and protect people and, do those sorts of behaviors. That would give a more net positive than living a life of avoidance, stuck in OCD. So we're trying to use that motivation and workability, values, goals, compassion to sort of see that we are deserving of a life and we can be responsible and care for people and do our best to do no harm in this world. But that's a long way from OCD. That's following science and evidence and what science says we should do around these things. It's not overshooting that by a long, long margin into OCD. Um, Responsibility and checking OCD, some similar things with the with the responsibility OCD component. I think, with both these themes, I also think you have to go over the mental compulsion of planning and tracking the spread and the threat and the contaminants with OCD, with contamination OCD. So you have to really do a lot of work on the mental compulsions and not only focus on the physical compulsions. You have to also get very good with the intense feelings of disgust. So you have to build up a lot of acceptance and distress tolerance skills, emotional acceptance, sort of act skills to work with emotions or mindfulness skills like in John's book or other kind of skill sets to deal with this high distress. And it's the same with checking, a lot of the mental compulsions is driving the physical compulsions, the catastrophic images of what could go wrong. We've got to learn to be able to observe those and realize in both these themes, we can't trust our minds. We can't believe everything it's saying because no one else is following this to this extent. And, statistical probability is not, the risk is as high as our brain is saying. We're getting in cars and doing other things that are much higher risk. It's that sense that I could have made the mistake and then people would judge me. So again, like contamination, we want to kind of look at the presentation of it. Is it about like I could mess up here and then everyone would hate and judge me, or is it about the actual risk that we're overestimating the threat of? Mm. We have to also look at the workability of doing this much checking. I always think, would you want your aeroplane pilot to do this amount of checking and this sort of behavior before they fly a plane? I certainly wouldn't. All that repetitive behavior, you're more likely to miss other things if you're an aeroplane pilot, or you're so stressed or so overwhelmed and confused, you're not going to be present and engaged. So why is it any different with this? Yes, you can do a mindful, look around the house and you can do that once, and you could argue that that is a good safety precaution, and a lot of people will do that, and it depends where you live. Do you live in a city where there's higher risk of burglary, or do you live with housemates that do occasionally leave ovens on and things like that? Okay, you could say, doing one mindful check could be relevant. At the same time, overshooting that into 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 50 more times checking is not making anyone safer. It's making you more doubt. Same with the photographing the evidence or filming the evidence or the mental reviews, all those other compulsions actually get us doubting ourselves and really aren't working to be responsible and to care for the safety of others. I would argue they're making people less safe, or even if it's not that, you're robbing yourself of joy and enjoyment and connection and satisfaction and different emotions, positive emotions that we can get from living an engaged and connected life free from OCD. Um, we might need to be doing with both of these some imaginal exposure on the core fears and, working some of that stuff as well to get underneath it, the kind of images and thoughts that are driving these behaviors. We need to get more comfortable with them so we can see them just as images, just as words in our head, just as feelings, and learn to urge surf. The urge surfing skill is really a key one from ACT for both these themes with more physical compulsions. Um, but don't miss the mental compulsions. There's going to be a huge amount of analyzing, planning, mental review, checking, threat monitoring for threats. You're going to walk into a room or a space in a very different frame of mind with these types of OCD than you would if you didn't have them. It's a bit like if you had a spider phobia and you walk into a room, you're going to be checking and threat monitoring that, versus if I walk into this room, not afraid of spiders, I'm going to be comfortable and I'm going to enjoy being in this space. Um, so we got to go after all those compulsions. So again, big list of compulsions, identifying, all the detail of the OCD and then systematically challenging it bit by bit, getting good at urge surfing, getting good at all the skills to complement ERP. I think probably the responsibility part is a huge one here, and building up a compassionate view that actually I deserve a life, and really that is the only way I am going to connect and be there for the people in my life, is if I get free from OCD. I'm not keeping anyone safer, with these behaviors. I'm actually robbing the world of my participation and my connection. So trying to use those motivational skills as well and compassion skills to work on that. Um, just right OCD. For me, there's a huge component of working on that feeling, the just wrong feeling. We have to get very comfortable with just wrong in order to overcome just right. It feels like tiny little things we're doing, and there's a lot of relief from doing them. But we got to be really honest and add up all the behaviors, how much of our life it's taken over, the workability of it, the cost of it, what is it taking away. Try to be really honest about that, and then set this goal to get really comfortable with just wrong, with that feeling, so that I can be the Jedi master, if you like, of feeling just wrong and engaging in life and being able to accept and be with that feeling. And then over time, it will get easier, but we have to be in this middle ground where we're learning to live with just wrong and everything the brain is telling us, and all the reasons it's giving us to say, oh, it's only a small thing, you may as well go and do it, you'll feel better, or you won't be able to sleep if you don't do this, or the different stuff that comes up with just right. Again, looking for any complexity and any beliefs in there that are tripping us up. Often there's a belief that I can't handle these intense feelings, or I can't function well with these intense feelings, and we've got to learn that actually people function very well with chronic pain, people function very well with disabilities, people function very well with things that are really distracting and pulling people out of life. And if they can do that, then we can learn to do this with these difficult feelings.